A lot of people know us by the Quad Cities, and we work really closely with our Illinois partners on all kinds of different things, not just emergency management, but just one large metropolitan area. It comes to with its challenges, though. I mean, you have the Mississippi in the middle, of course, and then you have two separate FEMA regions, two separate EPA regions, two separate state guidelines. Not to make it political, but you have a Democrat governor in Illinois and a Republican governor in Iowa, and it comes with its challenges.
Yeah, what time is it?
I've been looking forward to this all day, Chris. It is time for another Readiness Rewired Healthcare Preparedness podcast.
Awesome. And Mike, you're here?
Hey, man, we're online, ready to go, rolling.
And I think we've got a guest. Al, you want to introduce our guest this week?
We do. We have another special guest, a good friend of ours, good friend of mine, and a colleague that I've worked with for a long time. Brian Payne is the Director of Emergency Management at Scott County. And Brian, we want to welcome you. We're anxious and interested to hear about how emergency management in a county level connects with the hospital emergency preparedness team, and what you've done, some of the things in the county that others might be interested in, because we realize that not all EMAs, emergency management agencies, operate the same. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. And why don't you take it off with a little bit of explanation of what's going on in your neck of the woods?
I appreciate that. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys. I'm very, very passionate about healthcare. Actually, I come from the healthcare world. I worked for a hospital-based ambulance service for almost 15 years prior to coming to Scott County. So to be quite frank and blunt, healthcare is right down my lane. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to be here with you guys. And thankfully, it's just a beautiful day outside right now. All the severe weather we had last week passed us by. We didn't have any problems there. So that's definitely a little check mark in the win column, excuse me. So yeah, kind of taking life a day at a time over here, really.
So tell us, in Scott County, which is in Iowa, you've got a really unique situation there because we border with Illinois right on the Mississippi River. So you do a lot of teaming up with Rock Island EMA. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, so we call it the Quad Cities around here. And for anyone around the general, I would say, larger regional area, even up towards Chicago and up towards Des Moines, a lot of people know us by the Quad Cities. And we work really closely with our Illinois partners on all kinds of different things, not just emergency management, but our health department. Cities work really well together. If there was an emergency on the Illinois side, Public Works from Iowa go over, law enforcement, fire, all of those different things. And a lot of the reason that happens actually is because a lot of our residents either live here, work there, or vice versa. So I mean, there's a lot of crossover. It's just one large metropolitan area. It comes to with its challenges, though. I mean, you have the Mississippi in the middle, of course, and then you have two separate FEMA regions, two separate EPA regions, two separate state guidelines. Not to make it political, but you have a Democrat governor in Illinois and a Republican governor in Iowa, and it comes with its challenges. But overall, at the base level of the two counties, we work really well together, and that's how we try to approach almost everything that we do.
So, Brian, what don't you have some unique threats or threat potentials over there too? Is there an arsenal in Rock Island, and I don't know what else you got in that neck of the woods?
Yeah, actually, so we have the Rock Island Arsenal. It's a military base. It's actually technically in Illinois, but it's right in the center, right in the river. It's an island. Then we have John Deere Worldwide Headquarters, plus 3 industrial plants in the Quad Cities, 2 in Illinois, 1 in Iowa. We have Arconic, which used to be Alcoa. We have a ton of rail that comes through here. We're a big commerce from that perspective. We have a lot of chemical factories on the Illinois and Iowa side, both. They produce different goods and then ship them by rail or by barge for that matter. Yeah, we have quite a bit going on. Quite a few different opportunities for planning as well.
Well, and
not to
Brian,
mention,
let me jump in there real quick, because the other one that Brian and I take part in is because of, we mentioned the Mississippi River. We have, with our Coast Guard partners, we have the Area Maritime Security Committee, and we do a lot of planning on exercises with the river that Brian and the EMA really kind of take a lead in, and then allow hospitals and the fire departments and law enforcement and public health and others to join in. And we've done some really interesting exercises with the Coast Guard because of the river and all the commerce that goes up and down that place as well.
well,
Yeah,
not
that's
to mention, I was going to say the natural risks and threats. Flooding along the Mississippi River has long been storied in, preparedness and response because of the impacts it can have on the four communities that represent the Quad Cities, obviously, right? And then you're fortunate to have the National Weather Service office for this region sitting in your community. So nice resources there too.
Yeah, we're really lucky. Actually, working with the National Weather Service is amazing. We have a great partnership with them. For example, we're piloting a new weather spotter application that our team developed for them. So they have a lifetime dashboard to where if I'm a weather spotter anywhere in Scott or Rock Island County, Illinois, we even had some from Clinton County last year during the tornadoes that came through late March. But they take pictures of a funnel cloud or a tornado or anything, hail, and it's lifetime into the National Weather Service's operational center there. It's pretty impressive, actually. It's really neat. But yeah, the Mississippi, it's always an opportunity for growth when it comes with the Mississippi. That's for sure. Flooding overall, we have down pretty well. 2019 was unlike anything we'd seen. And I know you hear that a lot in major disasters, right? But the river was up for so many days. I mean, I'm talking months at a major flood stage. That is unheard of. It normally goes up. It's up for a couple weeks. It goes right back down. It's just how the normal is. Everything about 2019, there was not one thing that was normal about 2019. It was actually that flood in general actually caused us to do a ton of outreach to our medical partners in Scott County, at least due to critical infrastructure and the possibility of losing wastewater. And we came close to almost losing potable water as well. So we reached out to all of our nursing homes, doctors' offices, hospitals. And I mean, essentially, and for lack of a better word, we told them, dust off your plans, start looking at what it's going to mean for you to lose potable water and wastewater. And since that time, we wrote a flood mitigation grant in our office did, and we partnered with Genesis Health System for their East Campus here in Davenport. Mm-hmm. And it's still being done, but we partnered with Iowa American, our potable water company, and we're building a water well right next to that hospital, and it's going to be its own water main coming in there. So even if they lose the main infrastructure, they'll shut down the valves and they'll run just off that well so we can maintain our primary hospital in the community.
Wow. Hey, that's cool. And speaking of threats, who are the authorities that oversee, provide guidance to you and your department?
Yeah, so in Iowa, we run under through Iowa code. We're made up of what's called the Emergency Management Commission. So we report to every mayor, one board of supervisor that's appointed to us from the county board, and then the sheriff. So in Scott County, we have 18 different bosses, so to speak. We meet this Thursday, actually, for an example, and we come together and we talk about different stuff. I was trained initially in Illinois before I came over to Iowa in emergency management. And I will tell you, in comparison to the two programs, and they both have pros and cons, don't get me wrong here. I really love the approach we have over here in Iowa through that code, specifically because we get to know those mayors, we get to know the community better. It really helps us to see that bigger picture and to, kind of be that umbrella for them, right? What can we do to support them? How can we help them? You get to know them one-on-one. There's a lot of pros to that.
And then Brian, what happens? I mean, that's to work on the local level. What about the state level? Who oversees and provides direction to you?
So we work under Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. They're at the state level through the State Emergency Operations Center, and their director is appointed by Governor Reynolds or the governor, which is very typical in most states, especially the home rule states. So that's who we would work with. They provide guidance. They do a lot of different aspects like that. They do have authority over us to a certain degree based on plans, grants, other aspects like that. But overall, based on how code is written, we actually are here to execute our board's vision, our mission from them. We take full direction from them. So even the state aspect, the Homeland Security at Iowa, they don't have a lot of authority to kind of tell us what we should and shouldn't be doing, which, to be quite frank, in emergency management, that's a really great opportunity because every single county in this state is different. And there's not really a one size fits all kind of program. It's all based on the community needs, the partnerships, the amount of industry, rail coming through, no rail coming through. I mean, there's so many variables when it comes to this. It allows us to really make a program that fits our needs here locally.
So the feds are, I mean, the state is kind of a way station for the federal, probably from some federal grants, some education opportunities, and managing some resources on down to you, making those things available. I know they offer a lot of education across the state, and then you can send some of your partners to that or yourself. Don't you take a formal training series through Homeland Security from Iowa?
Yeah, it's a professional development series in Iowa per code, and it's just great experience, honestly. There's things you go through. It's 4 sessions in Iowa, and then you have to have a lot of FEMA independent studies or other actual FEMA classes, right, with certifications to be able to complete that, yeah.
And so I was going to say, those 4 sessions are like 3 or 4 months apart too, right? So that
Correct.
allows a lot of development and diving into that content. And that's pretty standard for each county, for their leaders to take that.
That's correct, yeah. And they do a lot of good stuff, because they talk about the budgeting process. They talk about the plan development and how we fit into Iowa. It's about a vertical interlock and a horizontal interlock. How can we better interlock with each other where we can, when we can? From us going up to the state going up to FEMA, and then horizontally, how does Scott County EMA connect into Clinton County Iowa EMA and vice versa, right? I mean, there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, yeah.
Well, and the thing that is interesting, and Brian, you might go into a little more detail, with all the EMAs in the counties, they don't all operate the same. And I don't mean that as a bad thing, because some have a lot more support in their county to do things. Like I've said, the EMA group that we have in Scott County, Iowa, is probably one of the strongest in Iowa. Now we have some other really good ones, but there's some that are really struggling and don't interact as much with their community partners as you and your team do. How do you see that all flowing within, let's say just even Iowa?
Well, let's back the train up just a little bit there. I would say we have a very strong team here in our office, right? And we're very blessed to have really good leadership from the EMA Commission. And I'm not just saying that. I mean that genuinely. Yep. We have great partnerships with Scott County, the administration side of it. So, I mean, we really are very blessed here to be fortunate to be given the autonomy to work in different directions. Why I say we're the best, you will never hear those words come out of my mouth ever, because quite frankly, I'm a life learner. And our office is a life learner office, right? There's always opportunities for improvement. With that being said, going back to how blessed we really are, I mean, we have amazing partnerships here. I could have an emergency right now, and I could send a message out, and I could have 50 people in my EOC work in different positions, different functions in less than 25 minutes. They drop everything. They come here. We are very, very lucky. That is one of the benefits to being a larger county, is you have more people to pull from. But in relationship to that, though, you also have to build that, right? There's a lot of outreach. There's a lot of time that comes into that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. You're kind of AJ Mum from Polk County, in one of those Iowa classes I was required to. He made a comment during the class teaching, and it really hit home to me because I never thought about it from this perspective. But you kind of have to be a salesman of why people should engage and what's the benefit of that. And, God knows we've had enough emergencies in the last half decade, not only in Scott County, but throughout the state of Iowa. But, as we look through that, the iron was hot. People are interested. They're intrigued. And even before COVID, for example, we did a ton of outreach with our healthcare facilities. Like I started it with, we're very pro about it. It was a lane I was very familiar with. And ultimately what it comes down to and I've spoken at a conference about this, partnerships is everything in our field. We have 3.5 FTEs for emergency management, and if we were to do a full activation, which we would call a level 5 activation, I need at least 40 people to help me operate that EOC. 3.5 people cannot do that at this level.
Yep.
Right? We have to have those things. And we're really lucky to have that and have good relationships.
And for the acronym, for those who aren't as familiar, the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, you're welcome. But what I kind of look at, and I explain at the hospital level, we have the Incident Command Center. And the EOC I look at as the Incident Command Center on steroids, because it's not only pulling in your team, but the team is the community members and all the fire, the law enforcement, the hospitals, the public health, you name it, city, the works, the public works department, a lot of people. So your EOC, I mean, I've been there. Your EOC is quite impressive. And unfortunately, not all EMAs have that level of luxury as well.
Well, I mean, you have some county EMAs in this state. There's 99 counties, and I think there's a total of 97 coordinators because some counties combine together with one. There are some counties that are only a part-time EMA coordinator. Yeah. Some county EMAs are one person, and they're overseeing emergency management and their county dispatch center. I mean, there's a lot of variation in that. And again, I'm not being derogatory towards those counties. There's just different opportunities, different backgrounds. There's a lot that goes into this.
It's not unlike healthcare emergency management, right? I mean, I'd say there's even more variability maybe at the hospital or healthcare level, just because, how many FTEs are there in healthcare emergency management? Not many, at least in this part of the country, right? Or at least in our state. And with EMAs, I was actually surprised to hear there were as many as you just said. I thought there was even more counties that might have to share an EMA, a director or a coordinator. So I guess I was surprised there wasn't even more folks trying to buddy up. But it's tough. You're right. The resources to be able to manage an incident. You mentioned 40 people or whatever in your EOC. Let's be clear to everybody, and this is something I remember when I first got into healthcare emergency management. There is only one EOC. The EOC sits in your county, right? There's and there is the state, right? But your hospital doesn't have an EOC. Right. Your hospital has a hospital command center, or sometimes called a command post. But I think the more appropriate term would be a hospital command center, right? And so it feeds up to and communicates with the county EOC. And so I think one of the things we need to make clear to everybody who's getting into healthcare emergency management is just what is the chain of request when you need resources, the rings of the tree. Let's describe that. Okay, so Brian, take it from there. How do the rings of the tree work during a response? You activate your EOC. Maybe the hospitals are activating their command posts. The cities might be doing the same thing. How does all this work, and what is the role of the county EOC?
Yeah, so that's a really great statement, and I'll speak specifically to Scott County just so we're clear. So when we open up the Emergency Operations Center for the county, we usually try traditionally, pending the event, we call in someone from one of our hospitals. We ask for a liaison to come in from one of the health systems or both health systems. We have a Unity Point. We have a smaller hospital from Unity Point in Scott County as well. So we asked them to come over because they watch bed availability. They have, their fingers on the pulse directly with the hospital. Those hospitals are key pieces of infrastructure that we do not want to let falter in any way. We want to make sure that they're up and going because most likely we need an emergency department. You may need ORs, et cetera, right? From there, what we usually do and traditionally do, we'll activate what's called Emergency Support Function 8, which is health and medical. We staff that with our hospital liaisons. Will come in and kind of be there with them. Our health department folks, ambulance, this is contingent, right? It's all situational based, obviously. But that's usually where we would direct anyone other than the hospitals to report to. So let's say if you had a long-term care facility, a dialysis center, we would push information out to all of these partners and say, if you have an emergency or a problem and you need the County Emergency Operations Center, follow your chain of command, right? Because some of those doctors' offices, for example, should report to someone at the health system, and some of the health systems or the big health system corporations, when it comes to the emergencies, they have nothing to do with those doctors' offices, right? So they need to follow that out on their own. And then whichever, whether it be the hospital folks or whether it be that individual doctor's office or assisted living, they would call directly into that number. And then we would work with them to provide support. COVID's a great example. We need PPE support. We need this. We need that. Everyone in healthcare lived those worlds, right? I mean, what a nightmare that was for everyone. Some of the other things we do specific to healthcare, and COVID's a great example of this, right? You know, in any emergency, any large scale disaster, you establish your policy group, is what we like to call it. And they're the ones that make the decisions. No, we need this road opened back up by then, or no, we need to do this, or no, go ahead and do that. Yep, we know it's going to cost $100,000, but just get it done. We need to do it, right? Whatever that looks like. So through COVID, we brought in multiple physicians. We brought in several people, and we established an emergency guide, our emergency policy specific to who would get PPE. We had 4 tiers, and then within each tier we had subsections. So if we had requests for 200,000 gloves, for example, and we only had 40,000 on hand, we would give everything to tier 1. And then in tier 1, you had tier 1A, B, C, D, and then you'd work through that process. We established an emergency policy for that through that group. Those are some of the things we would do at our level. And this is just, I mean, I'm really honest, I'm scratching the surface for you of the different pieces that can come into this, right?
Yeah. So, Brian, I think you made reference to this in there too. A lot of the county EMAs use the ESFs. I think they're federally designated essential support function categories. And then you have those people as subject matter experts, if you will. Could you give us some examples besides the health and medical, which I think is ESF 8, right?
That is
Out
correct.
of, what is it, 15 or 20? I don't know.
Yeah, there's 15 of them actually. And so like ESF, emergency support function. Sorry, I keep doing the acronym. So if you're listening to the podcast, I'm doing my best for you. It's so hard when you speak a different language, right?
Yep.
So your emergency
as long
support...
as we defined it once, that's cool. I mean,
right. Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
So ESF 15 is our public information, right? That's a cadre of people that come together and support that. ESF 13 is law enforcement. ESF 6 is mass care and sheltering, which is more of your long-term thing, right? We have this building issue. These people evacuated. They need somewhere. They need an emergency shelter, right? 3 is public works. 2 is communication. And communication means emergency communication, operational communication. So that's our communication with the hospital, right? Our first responders. That's what 2 is designated for. 15, again, is the public information, anything that's going out, press releases, guidance, those different things, you know. So there's all kinds of them. And what's great about them is it allows us, and we pre-establish them. That's part of our plan, right? Is we pre-establish these. We have the documents, plans in place as well as we can. And then we assign multiple people to be the coordinators or leads for them. So if we activate them, so for example, going back to health and medical, our ESF 8 is led by our public health department here in Scott County. They do an amazing job. We're very engaged with them. Honestly, they're probably some of our closest partners. So they will come in and take the lead for that. We guide it a little bit along with other healthcare partners that may come in, right, pending the situation. But ultimately, they have the lead for that area of operation when we come in and activate our emergency operations center. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I think that gave a great fundamental understanding of kind of a directory that you can pull from when a disaster occurs, saying, well, I think I need these ESFs. You set those up in your emergency operations center. And then as people identify their own needs, organizational needs, they call into you, and you then, or your EOC or the specific number for the ESF, you can refer them. And that helps load balance the requests,
right,
and coordinate them and bring them all together.
That's correct.
I want to step back to one thing that you mentioned about that policy group, which is really, really a sharp thing that you guys came up with. I know that during COVID, there was a lot of questions when supplies were in short supply for the various, essential supplies that we needed. And a lot of states had crisis standards of care documents, which outlined when there were shortages, who would decide and provide kind of a general policy for that. I don't believe Iowa has that. I do believe Illinois has it. Do you
Yeah.
guys, have you had to bump up against that at all, or it's more of a healthcare thing? Yeah.
It is more of a healthcare thing, but in all honesty, when it came to that from a logistics perspective, specifically when we needed to put requests into the state, right? Everyone knows about the national stockpile that was supposedly there and then it wasn't there, but it's kind of there. You know, I mean, we all kind of lived through that, right? We're not really sure what happened,
Right.
but it's there, right? So anytime we put a request into the state emergency operations center, which was then filtered by Iowa's HHS, is what they call it now, right?
Health and Human Services. Yeah.
We had to make sure we were following their policies, their procedures in that regard, right? We could only request it for these types of entities. You know, could only request for X number of days of a burn rate, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to filter that. We actually created, we're kind of nerds when it comes to the incident command, right? So we created a specific FEMA form. It's called the ICS 213RR, resource request. And we modified that specific to COVID to where we add them. If you're a doctor's office or you're a fire department, it didn't matter. You use the exact same form, and we required them to complete it and then also add in their burn rate, their average usage, right, blah, blah, blah. So that way, even if we could fulfill it and not go to the state, we still had it documented from that perspective, and we weren't asking them to pick two different forms pending the needs, right? In addition to that, overall, we didn't bump into the state in any other way. We were pretty fortunate early on. We found some really good vendors through some other partnerships, and we were able to procure quite a bit of PPE. So really,
personal protective equipment.
Thank
right?
you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
I keep doing that, I know.
Sorry.
But we were able to procure enough to where we could kind of manage pretty much. We were pretty self-sufficient. There was one time where we had a huge request, like 90,000 gloves come in, and it was from our bigger health system. And we obviously couldn't fulfill that. You know, I mean, it would have taken everything we had plus, I don't even remember now, 50, 60,000 extra, whatever that number was. So we put a request in for the state for some of those things. But overall, man, what a stressful time. God, it feels like a lifetime ago, but it worked out okay, really. One of the other things. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So one of the things you're illustrating is the rings of the tree concept that we talked about, right?
Correct.
So a local healthcare system or a hospital, a nursing home or whatever, they need resources. Who do they go to first? Well, if they can't meet the need themselves, then
Correct.
oftentimes they go to the mothership. Maybe there's a mothership, a larger enterprise, healthcare enterprise that they're part of. If the enterprise can't help you, okay, then the next ring out might be to reach out to local government, right? And so
Right.
where that starts to get happening is really in the EOC, correct? So
Correct.
you go to the county level folks in your area and you say, hey, we need this, we need that, and this is why, and we can't find it anywhere else, or we have no other resources. Then you guys try to work your magic. And it's interesting that you say, well, we had this on in stock or on hand and we didn't have enough. I wonder how many county EMAs actually have any kind of warehousing or ability to stock up on any kind of assets or resources to bleed into or to tap into first before they have to make the jump to calling up the state and, submitting a request through, the state group to get resources from the state stockpile or some other resource the state has. And then it's only the state that can go to the feds. So, I mean, that ring of the tree thing is pretty important. And I ran smack dab into that in the flood of 2008. We were state owned and operated entity, right? And my leadership started thinking, okay, we'll go directly to the state. Wait a minute. That's not good, at least from our local level. So we may have a discussion about that in maybe one of our next episodes, but trying to leapfrog over the county is never a good idea. You should always follow the chain, right?
Yeah, it can be frustrating, but in all honesty, what it does is it organizes it. You know, you think about running an emergency department or your doctor's office. It doesn't matter what healthcare entity type you are. There's a process, a flow of information. And when you have a crisis, a large scale event taking place, it's so important to have those foundational communication pathways established because it reduces confusion, it reduces actually the stress and there's just so many elements that it just takes care of and it organizes it in an appropriate manner. And it may seem silly sometimes to go to this person for them just to go to another person, but the reality of what people don't understand, and we'll just stay with COVID for a minute as much as I don't like talking about it. I'm sure every one of you on the call and any of your listeners are probably so sick of hearing about COVID, but we had a local distillery. We ended up calling from a logistics perspective out of our county EOC. We called 3 chemical factories that are local. We were able to get train shipments of different things into them, and we produced our own hand sanitizer in less than 7 days because of our relationships with them, right? And I don't mean that in an arrogant manner, right? I mean that, and that's why they call the county EOCs, because it helps us to identify the largest gaps we have in our community at large, and then we can work to work through that. The Rock Island Arsenal, the military base, they have a textile factory. They build different textile aspects for our uniforms for our military personnel. So we talked to the colonel that's in charge of the base over there, and he was all for spinning down what they were doing for the military and spinning up making cloth masks. And we actually had congressional leadership working with the Pentagon trying to get them to mission task that out of the Pentagon. What we didn't know is the White House was already at that time working with Haynes to shut down and do something different. We didn't know that, of course, but that goes back to those relationships and partnerships. We talked to Han Industries out of Muscatine, Iowa, and they shut down their manufacturing of making, computer chairs and different stuff like that, and they started producing gowns for everyone.
Yeah, for us
all about
too.
Relationships.
Yeah, we had them.
That's it's not about us. Really, what this is about a team effort. It's that unity of focus and coming together as one, and following that chain is very important.
So we should probably insert for healthcare right now too, just a brief conversation on the 96-hour plans at healthcare facilities. That generically is referred to as 96 hours, which is about, I think it's called that because that's about how long you can wait sometimes for federal aid if you're expecting that. So they're saying, what can you do with the resources that you have available for 96 hours or less to manage your essential function? So that's, what can you substitute? What can you conserve? What are the things that you can do over what timeline? Again, that kind of relates to the crisis standards of care too, about conventional care, contingent care, and crisis care. But part of our homework for healthcare is to understand what those resources are and then be able to come to the table with you as the county emergency manager, hopefully before a disaster, and say, hey,
Yes.
This is my 96-hour plan. This is where I'm looking at sourcing some things. Maybe if you got some problem areas, you can talk to your county emergency manager because they may know of a source or be working with another healthcare provider, a long-term care provider or something like that. Does that sound right, Mike or Al? Kind of that
absolutely.
96-hour?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember back during the flood of 2008, there were concerns about enough fuel for our generators. We have 12 of them, and they consume a lot of fuel. And so we were looking to the county EOC to try to source some diesel fuel. And they basically said, all right, here, we're talking to the military. We can look at National Guard, and we can probably have a tanker of diesel fuel out here at the EOC in a matter of a relatively short period of time. So we can source some diesel fuel for you. Well, that's awesome because, back then the roads were blocked and they were you couldn't get down Interstate 80. It was a horrible situation. So, the EOC has the capability of reaching into all kinds of people's pockets and be able to potentially request resources for you. And boy, we sure took advantage of that.
So it'd be important to know too if your source for fuel is also being counted on by a number of other elements in the community. And then again, that would be kind of through your county emergency manager, knowing, again, what resources are available and stuff. So this is a great conversation to have. Again, as Brian was saying, it's kind of that relationship managing, saying, look, we've done some homework. This is my worksheet, my 96-hour plan. And hey, at 24 hours, I'm at a pinch point for this. what can you see or what can you say about maybe support for that ahead of time, and help really validate your plan. So it's a great opportunity that, again, Brian, you've been pitching that throughout this podcast of, network, communicate, share. Do you do after action reports, Brian, after your real incidents? Or, I mean, you do after your exercises and your drills, right?
Yep.
So you also do these, where at a certain point after kind of the dust is settled and people are kind of back to their routines or their new normals, you bring those people together and they contribute to an after action report and improvement plan. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. After every real world event, exercise, it doesn't matter. Let's be honest, right? You could have the best plans, best procedures. In my experience of working in the healthcare world, specifically when you get into places where they wear multiple hats. I'm the chief nursing officer and I'm the emergency preparedness person for the hospital, right? Or your doctor's office. I'm now a nurse manager, right? I went to school. I'm a nurse. I was a clinician. I did a great job. And now I've been promoted to manager. And now I'm in charge of emergency preparedness for my clinic, right? There's a lot of other double duties that come in, or sometimes triple duties, right? This is a great opportunity for you to understand that you can have, and I'm not trying to say don't plan. I'm not trying to say to do any of these, because I agree, but don't stress that you have to have everything, because there will never be a perfect plan, right? There's always areas for opportunity. Make them as best as you can make them, test them, push them. I encourage you, and sometimes our CAOs may not like that, right? Coming from the health system side, I can speak from personal experience. We want to do the best. They like everything being perfect, but that is not reality. That's not realistic when it comes to this, because you want to know where your gaps are so you can improve them. But knowing the right people and having that is by far the most important aspect of emergency management, emergency preparedness, is the relationship, is knowing the people. And when you don't know, you just pick up the phone, but you know who to call, right? So you pick it up, you make that phone call, and they can guide you, direct you, get you the resource, whatever that looks like. There's so much power there.
And Brian, on that note, and going back to the larger EMAs versus the smaller county EMAs, that maybe the person in charge of that is wearing multiple hats and that type of thing. What's the communication level of some of those? Because a disaster can happen anywhere. It doesn't just happen in the big communities where everybody's ready to go. It can happen in the smaller communities where the EMA person is a part-time here and a part-time there. Have you had some experience? How do they reach out, and what do they do, and who's there to help support them ongoing?
I don't have a ton of experience in that. I think the best piece of advice I could give to your listeners is reaching out to the emergency manager. And I say that because, some of the EMAs in Iowa, for example, first respond. Some of the EMAs may not open up the county emergency operations center, because if they're all volunteer fire departments, for example, and they only have a couple health, department folks, and they're busy and tied up responding to the immediate emergency for life safety components, they may not have the personnel to staff an emergency operations center. They're calling in backup from us and other partners, but it takes time to get there. And I don't mean that, again, in a derogatory way towards those individuals or their programs. But I don't know that I want to speak too much to that. I know they work very hard. I know there's still great communication, even if it's a one-person operation. In my experience, at least, we work closer in our district. So similar to the healthcare coalitions have regions, right? We're in District 6 for EMA. Our EMAs that are one-person shops will answer the phone 24/7. They will give you every piece of information, do whatever they can for you. But I mean, I really honestly can't speak too much to the ground level operations for them at their county level.
You bring up an interesting point there. So let's say a given county emergency management director is looking at the situation and goes, I'm getting overwhelmed on this. This thing's going way over my head. You guys have a system where you can call out to your colleagues and get some help to come in from the other EMAs, correct? I mean, you have a way of kind of doing a mutual aid support kind of thing, don't you?
Yeah, so actually in Iowa, there's a couple things to your point there. One, Iowa has written into code, it's called an IMAC, it's an Iowa Mutual Aid Compact. So basically any government partner, so any EMA, any police officer, public works, it doesn't matter as long as they're government It's an immediate short-term mutual aid agreement, basically, right? You contract them to come in for support. Where you're talking about, I think more though, is calling in from like a resource perspective, is like sending a page out saying we need help with all of this, right? We do have some of those systems in place, but I'll tell you there's room for improvement by adding more people on. And it's like any comms list, right? It's one of those things that somebody doesn't keep it up. It's only as good as it is till the first time somebody changes. But in District 6 for our area, that works very well. We have really good email blasts, and then Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management, they have an accurate current list. So we can lean on them as well. For example, and I can't go too far into details, for the building collapse in Davenport in 2023, we did an all call to emergency managers across the state of Iowa because our EOC, we needed support. And we actually pulled in EMAs from all over the state and sent them down to help support accountability on the scene with the state urban search and rescue team.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I was thinking about, and it's a great concept, right? So that
It
kind
is.
of gives the smaller folks some
Correct.
potential for some help, but even the big folks, like your bigger systems, like what you have, sometimes it could be, well, if an airliner goes down or something like
That's
that, you're going
exactly
to need
right.
a lot of resources, and so I think we in healthcare, we tried to create the same thing with our sort of ad hoc alliance that we put together a number of years ago, where if a smaller healthcare entity needs help and maybe they don't have a mothership, maybe they're an independent of some sort
Yep.
or whatever, is there anybody they can call in the healthcare world for that assistance? And we created this hospital coordinating center sort of concept that they did out east, sort of ad hoc here in the state of Iowa, because at the time our healthcare coalitions were not well developed. And unfortunately, the development of healthcare coalitions in our state was greatly, sort of hampered by a lot of different factors. And I think we're probably going to get into that in one of our coming sessions with some of our guests we're going to have on. But, we in healthcare need that same kind of support you enjoy from a response perspective that you can get from your colleagues.
Yeah, I agree with that. We partnered as an agency with Healthcare Coalition Region 5 and the Happy Group, the Hospital Alliance.
For preparedness in Iowa.
Iowa.
I
Yep.
just know it's called Happy.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we offered some of that messaging system through the Alert Iowa, right? Again, that's not about us. It's a free system that the state of Iowa purchases, and all emergency messaging is free. So why not partner with entities like yourselves or anyone else that wants to do it? Because the reality is, from an emergency management perspective or the emergency operations center's perspective, using those terms interchangeably sort of at the moment, not during the event really, but just for this conversation, the last thing I want is a hospital to need to evacuate. I don't want the hospital to evacuate. I don't want the nursing homes to have to evacuate. What do we need to do to give you whatever you need to be up, operational, and sustainment? Because we have so many other things going on that if you're impacted that bad, we need those resources stable and standing by. With that said, we need to be ready to support if needed. They should have their plans in place. They know they're responsible for that, but that doesn't mean they may not need help. And we want to be able to back them up. And this is one way before an event that we can back them up, is to help them establish communication pathways so they can ask their colleagues and lateral partners, that horizontal interlock between the agencies, how they can connect to each other and be able to work together. And then we can still be there to support them if the need were to arise.
And I think it kind of comes back to your statement earlier about, everyone should be reaching out, and we've got a lot of emergency preparedness listeners, others. They should be reaching out to their partners and reaching out to their county EMA. And if they haven't made that connection or haven't had a good connection with them, keep working on building that, because it is so important. And it's important to do it before the disaster hits, because when it hits, if you haven't done it, you are really behind the eight ball.
I'll give you a good example in that, Al, actually, and I hate to keep coming back to this reference. So when we established that policy for PPE, the other thing we did in conjunction with that, we only had $300,000 in reserve funds. So basically we had $300,000 in our savings account, right? One PPE purchase was over $150,000 for us, right? We don't buy personal protective equipment. That's not in our lane. That's not traditional for Scott County. That's just not normal, right? So half of our reserves were gone in one purchase. So we weren't sure when FEMA would be able to kick in financial support. We knew the president declared it as a national state of emergency. So we knew the funds would come, but we weren't sure. Is that 6 months? Is that a month? Normally it takes our projects from that side anywhere from 3 to 6 months before we start to see funding come in. And for an example, just to give you an idea, I still have almost $20,000 tied up in a COVID project waiting for that money from my savings account to come back into my savings. So that's normal for FEMA. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of that process, what we did was any government partner, we supported them and provided it because we report to their mayors. It's just the way our structure is. You know, you talk about the rings in the tree. It's just kind of there. Any private sector partner from doctor's office, Genesis, it doesn't matter who, we would invoice them. If we spent local taxpayer dollars on PPE, we would invoice them for the exact cost. Most of them are nonprofit and they were going to put a request into FEMA to be reimbursed. But a lot of them have bigger pockets than we have, right? A big health system is almost $1 billion company. So I know that I say that loosely because you guys had ridiculous expenses. Don't get me wrong. But, you know, we weren't sure. We needed money, cash flow flowing through, going out, coming back in, right? So we could sustain all operations to support everybody. Come to find out, FEMA did FEMA did a pretty decent job of getting us some cash flow back pretty early. But in the beginning, those are some of the things we just didn't know. Those relationships, Al, where I was going with all that, we have an amazing relationship with our nursing home, most of our doctor's office, even our dental offices for that matter. You know, I was kind of nervous, I'll be honest with you, in the beginning to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. Here's the policy, et cetera, et cetera. I was kind of nervous to get some pushback, right? And they trust us. They knew us. We're on first name basis with almost 80% of them. It was a great opportunity for our relationships actually to grow even stronger. They all completely understood. It was just an open conversation. There was no frustration. There was none of those negative emotions that, to be quite blunt, it's a pretty tense situation. If everyone remembers at the start of it, I didn't expect the conversation to go as good as it did, and they were very receptive and very understanding.
So, Mike, Al, I think you would join me in saying that I think the essence of what Brian has said and said over and over again, reach out to your county emergency management authority, meet them, have their phone number, engage with them well before the disasters, learn their planning cadence and about exercises and after action reviews and having them weigh in on virtually anything that you're planning to do to see if there's any cross current to that. And I know, Brian, there's an active coordination and communication between county emergency managers. If somebody is in a county and wants a resource, someone to come in and help them do some planning, and their county emergency manager maybe is tied up, I think you might be able to, outside of the 50, 60, 70 hours a week that you work for Scott County, you do have a small side business, I think, where you help people. The primary direction for that is to help people for a small enough fee that your wife and family will allow you to do that. But if we can, Mike, we can post his contact information for that. If people need the consultation, we can do that afterwards. Any last questions for Brian before we wrap this up?
So a real quick one, Brian. So we wrap it up. What do you see coming up in the future for your EMA and EMAs in general, just to be focused on? And I know that might get long, but just a short version, and we can follow up some other time.
I think honestly, the hardest thing that we have is, maintaining the relationships. And, speaking specifically for Scott County, all of the events we've had, from the levee breach and the flooding of 2019 to the building collapse of last year, the severe storms we had last week, people are starting to realize the benefit of emergency management within their communities, which is a great thing. Truly, that is a great thing. I think the challenge specific to emergency management is that's also going nationally to our federal legislators. So, for example, a factory, your super Walmarts are considered a chemical reportable, right? So they report this through what's called a tier 2 report, and they have to report all the chemicals on site. Well, they're pushing federal legislation that every year, every one of these are going to require a community-wide exercise. So just like our healthcare partners. So thankfully that got stopped, and I do support it to a certain degree. Don't get me wrong, but it's unmanageable because they would work with us to conduct a community-wide exercise. We have 142 tier 2 facilities in Scott County alone. That's unmanageable, right?
Yep.
So some of our concern is being prepared for that, and we have so much going on. We get pulled in a lot of directions. And that's not just because we're the third largest county in the state of Iowa. That's just because the nature of what we are and who we are as an industry. You know, if you look back to paramedicine, you look back to nursing in the comparison of two, paramedicine is a very infant, very toddler-like state from a time perspective. Nursing's been around for a very long time, right? And they're very scriptive with protocols and a physician and a lot of those different things you work through. Emergency management is even younger for the most part. And then if you look at the comparison to really what we're being pushed to do now, it's completely and dramatically changed the vision, of emergency management and emergency operations centers nationally just since 2001 after the 9/11, and then you throw in Hurricane Katrina. You know, so it's this evolving aspect of it, and it's very exciting, to be honest with you, but it's also very nerve-wracking. So, you know, like for us in Scott County, we do the best we can to stick to our core roots of who we are. We work very closely with our healthcare partners. We do quarterly aspects with them. I mean, they're invaluable. And I'm not just saying that again because we're on this podcast. I mean that genuinely.
Yep.
Mike?
No, I think the underlying theme here is that your local county emergency manager has to be one of your best friends if you work in healthcare, because man, you know, when the old fecal material hits the oscillating ventilation device, who are you going to call if you can't handle it yourself or within your own system? And, you know, reaching out to the next rung in the tree has to be your first move, because that's going to connect you to the state. It's going to connect you to the feds. That link in the chain has to be strong, and it has to be, you know, just an instant knee-jerk reaction. You gotta really trust these guys, and you got to be able to work well and frequently with them. And you know, God love you. What will we do without you?
Guys and gals. I mean, you meant guys generically, right? Since
Yeah,
guys and gals
absolutely.
are county emergency
EMAs in
managers.
general,
Yep.
right? Absolutely.
Yep. Awesome. And Mike, did you have a last minute reminder for people how to connect with Readiness?
Yeah, so we hope you enjoyed this episode, and keep in mind our email address is readiness.rewired@gmail.com. And we hope you folks join with us again. You subscribe, click that, ding that bell so you know when we post up a new video. And, you know, give us some feedback. We want to know, do you guys like us or do you think we suck? We try to give as much content as we can to be helpful. And, you know, we want to make it useful for everybody. So please come back to us again and join us.
And thank you, Brian.
Yeah, great job.
I really
Brian. Thank you.
appreciate this opportunity. Seriously, this is great.